Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
A warning to our listeners, some of the topics discussed in this podcast may be disturbing. If you need support, please contact your local crisis line or helpline. And if you're in Hong Kong and you'd like to call the Samaritans hotline, you can call them on 2896 0000. Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show.
You meet someone online and there's this instant connection. It's amazing how much the two of you just seem to click. They live somewhere far away and there's some plausible reason they can't travel to meet you. They tell you they're in love with you and you feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. They have a successful career, yet somehow they need money from you to solve a short-term problem, always with the promise of paying you back. Time goes on and they need more money more urgently. You've started to see the cracks and begin to wonder whether they've been lying this whole time. All of a sudden it hits you. You've been scammed. Fool Me Twice is the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, a woman who was drawn into the dangerous world of sweetheart scams. After a trip overseas to meet a stranger, a dangerous altercation in a Manchester hotel room, and thousands of pounds lost for good, she's here to tell her story. Fool Me Twice, a true crime podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Ozcast Network, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Today I'm here with Jill. Hi Jill, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, thanks so much for having me here today.
It's my pleasure. Jill, I just want to speak to you about a really important issue that's been going on in the media lately, and you're somebody who I know has been talking about what you've been through lately, and I believe you have your own Me Too story, and I wonder if you tell me what happened.
Yes, I do have my own Me Too story, and at the time when Me Too hashtag came out and there was all the Hollywood cases coming up, I actually got really present to how I have a Me Too story, but I didn't share it.
Oh, so it had been a secret.
Almost a secret. I told a few close friends and my family, but yes, I was not comfortable sharing it. I was still carrying a lot of shame. But to answer your question, my Me Too story, when I was 20, I went on holiday and I was in Bangkok and I'd recently broken up with my boyfriend, and I was at that age where fun and enjoyed drinking and going out and hanging out with boys. So anyway, I made a bad decision and I took a fancy to a local Thai boy. I'm hanging out with this boy and I really like him. Anyway, I don't know what happens, but I wake up in bed with him, fully clothed, but I have this sense of, I think I actually have to get out of here. My flight was actually the next morning. And so I went into the bathroom and opened the door, and in the bathroom were 3 or 4 of his friends waiting. And I have this memory of complete confusion as I realized that actually they were waiting to attack me. And then that was a flash. And then the next thing I knew, I was, held at knife point and then proceeded to be gang raped.
Oh my gosh. Initially, you knew straight away before it even started that you were in trouble because the 3 guys were in the bathroom, or the group of guys were in the bathroom.
Yeah, I just suddenly was like, well, I was like, what? Why? And then suddenly it was all like,
I mean, obviously it was really traumatic and a terrible experience, but do you remember it in flashes? Did time go slowly? Did it go fast? Did you disassociate from your body? What sort of happened to you in the moment?
Right. Mostly I remember having this feeling of slow motion realization and a sense of no way, this cannot be happening to me. And then sort of almost an out-of-body experience, watching it unfold and, even asking one of them for a cigarette, trying to get some sense of control, having fear and adrenaline and screaming, sort of a whole bag of emotions going on at one time. Eventually, and I have no concept here of how long it took for somebody to knock on the door and distract and break up someone from outside the room, break up the incident, let's say.
Yeah.
At that point, I can remember very clearly there was a knock, everyone ran out, apart from one I grabbed, and actually somehow have a memory of, I don't actually remember putting my clothes back on fully, but somehow I must have put my clothes back on. But I actually was in in Thailand, they have those tuk-tuks. So we were actually in a tuk-tuk. I don't know if I said we're going to the police or I don't know what we're doing. But then at some point he jumped out because of course there's no secure doors. But, I had some sort of weird adrenaline moment where I could kidnap one of these guys. And
you forced him into the tuk-tuk afterwards. You were going to take him to the police.
I think so.
Right.
But it is the actual moment, what I would say, it was like an out-of-body experience.
I've heard that happens to a lot.
Disassociating, and watching, and then eventually getting my flight, leaving. I didn't get to go to the police or anything.
Oh, you didn't? In the moment when it was happening, people say that it's kind of fight, flight or freeze. Did you have a feeling of being frozen or fighting or just wanting to flee?
I had a feeling of fighting in the beginning, and then at knife point, a feeling of freezing and just sort of surrendering.
Did you fear for your life in the moment? Some people see their sort of life flash before their eyes and they think, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the end. Or did you have a sense of whether you would get out of it or not?
I actually was sure I would get out of it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I was sure. But also, these were young guys. I don't know how malicious or just stupid or how planned, or if it's what you call it, tourism rape, and it's something that those guys do all the time. I don't know. I mean, I was scared. I felt fear, but I was definitely in a out-of-body sort of watching from above and just saying to myself, okay, just breathe and get through and it'll be okay.
Right. So you were kind of reassuring yourself during the process.
Yeah.
Wow, that sounds full on. I'm so sorry that you went through that. And I've had an experience where I've been in a situation where I felt like I could have been killed. It wasn't a rape, but I remember everything slowing down as well. And I remember staying completely calm. I didn't get hysterical. I didn't get angry. And I actually put that down to the fact that I had been in domestic violent relationships in my 20s. So it was kind of like, oh, here we go again. I'm in another dangerous, violent situation. Had you ever experienced anything in the past where you had been in that sort of situation or danger, or was this completely new to you? You were only young.
It was completely new. Afterwards, I was like, oh my God, I was such a spoilt brat, expat brat, being brought up in Hong Kong and thinking that this sort of thing doesn't happen to people, like that would never happen to anyone I would even know, let alone myself. Yeah, I fortunately had never had any experience that would be similar to or comparable to this. And I don't know if that made it harder to accept afterwards.
Yeah, I wonder. What was the impact? You didn't go to the police. The next day you had to get a flight. What happened then?
I got back to Hong Kong. I went to a friend's house. My friend was a good confidant as she comforted me, and I spoke to my ex-boyfriend, and there was still a lot of attraction from my side towards him. And that was quickly tarnished a little because he actually was the first person that I shared the story with who sounded like he didn't really believe me.
Right. And that's the worst thing, isn't it, for many young women, particularly when they have been sexually abused or raped and they tell somebody and they get the courage to do it. It's so important to believe that person and listen and take on board what they're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, there was a lot of devastation around his response, in fact, that made perhaps it harder to share with other people as well.
Yes, because your first attempt at sharing not really being believed, then you'd probably close up, wouldn't you? Because you wouldn't feel confident necessarily telling someone else because they may not believe you again.
Yeah, and also I think you've gone from perhaps being confident if you were, but there's definitely a feeling of being insecure, not trusting yourself, self-blame, and feel like if if this happened to anyone, I would just want the world to be a place where they can share and be supported. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that the Me Too movement has done. It started opening up these conversations about these kind of issues, which is a good thing. But I still think there's a lot of people, and society still has a long way to go to getting to a place where we can really be open and supportive. I mean, we need to get to a place where sexual assault doesn't happen at all.
Yeah.
That's where we need to get
Definitely.
to. So there's still a long way to go. How do you think it impacted you physically and emotionally afterwards?
Okay, so I got back to Hong Kong. I have just shared a bit about, having a support and then being a little bit rocky. But things that impacted me was I just felt lack of confidence, insecure. There's also the steps you have to take, precautionary, like have a pregnancy test, STD test, AIDS test. I also had an extreme physical response where my body expanded. Let's say I put on so much weight in the first week, maybe within 2 weeks of the event, I think my body weight was almost doubled.
So is that because of comfort eating?
Actually, no. So I think it really is the mind-body connection. And that's something I'm really fascinated by in, all realms where that does show up. I really believe that the emotional body and the physical body are connected. But my story of that is extreme. I mean, I was physically assaulted and then my body almost put up a protective, I'm ugly shield around me, which it isn't protective, it's damaging, because then I was like a fat kid who had no confidence. It wasn't really protecting me, but it definitely, I think, was a side effect of not wanting to be seen.
Yes, and I think that can happen to many people, can't it? You can go both ways, get bigger and be less attractive, or get smaller and smaller and smaller so that you're becoming invisible. But I believe that is quite common with people who have suffered from abuse. And what about the psychological effects? Did you have any kind of mental health issues following that? You talk about the physical.
Yes, so that was the physical. Yes, I would say that I didn't really share it with people. So I think I put on a overcoat of, started pretending that everything was okay. That only lasts for so long. And so then a few years later, I think I really did have depression, and eventually I took antidepressants for a short time.
And do you feel that was related to that incident?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I think I couldn't channel the expression. And so it came out as anger and upset. And sometimes I look back and I'm like, well, I was an angry teenager before that happened. So how can I pinpoint that it would be that? But I think it definitely added a whole new level of lack of trust of myself, lack of trust of others, a low self-esteem, low self-worth.
Tell me a bit about, you mentioned that you kind of felt guilty and you blamed yourself. What does that look like? What was that?
Well, I think it comes from, if I hadn't stayed out so late, if I hadn't drunk so much. You always hear about the movie The Accused or wearing a short skirt. I was actually wearing like some baggy jeans. So the whole thing, making decisions, just, not having a good judgment of character. And also, strangely, before I went out that night with those American guys staying at the hotel I was staying at, who had also been hanging out with, I actually said to him, are those guys okay? And so I didn't follow my intuition deep down as well. So maybe there's something there. But the thing is that I just was left feeling broken. And before that event, I was quite self-assured that anything was possible. And suddenly I was like, oh, the world is not safe.
Yeah, and that can take a long time to recover from. And do you think it made it more difficult because you didn't share it? You didn't have counselling, you didn't share it with friends and family, you didn't get support. Did that inhibit your progress for overcoming it?
Yes, I would say definitely. I would recommend anybody who has any form of trauma, whatever it is, to have the courage to share it in a supportive environment. I waited ages before telling my mum and dad because I didn't want to break their heart, just that simply. And and of course with other people, and just generally the shame and fear of judgment.
And how do you overcome that to be able to tell your story?
Well, for me, I was really lucky. I've had some great coaching and counselling. I don't know if you've heard of the Landmark Forum, but I did the Landmark Forum.
I have.
And it's a lot about sharing.
Yes, I did it actually in my 20s. Yeah,
Really?
I did the first course, 4 days. Yeah, I got quite a lot out of it. It was good.
Well, I'd say that actually as well, I had some sessions of really wonderful deep healing sessions with Michelle Harris, if you know.
Oh, yes, I know her. She's been on my podcast. She's about episode 115 or something.
Well, she really helped me with just talking about it in a safe space. I'd say that was because that was one-to-one and that was really great.
Was that where you started with Michelle, or did you start with the Landmark?
Oh, no, sorry. So I went to Michelle first. It came up in sessions. I didn't go to Michelle to talk about that, but it came up.
Oh, right.
And, it's just one of those things that I always felt I should talk about. I should heal properly. And I knew that talking would be a good way to do that deep down, but I just hadn't found the right sort of environment to do that. And so Michelle's sessions really helped me with that. And then shortly after, or kind of almost around the same time, I remember saying to Michelle that I was going to do the Landmark Forum. And it was when I was doing that I was in a safe group situation where I could really share about it and felt completely empowered by the sharing. It suddenly felt like, wow, this is something I should be sharing and really happy to share. And if I can make an impact for anyone else that's experienced any kind of trauma through sharing my story, then that would be really powerful. And also getting involved with Rainlily, that also sort of came out of having that courage. Once you really share, it really loses its power over you.
Doesn't
and then
it?
you
And
can share all the time.
Isn't it amazing? The shame just falls away, doesn't it? Because that shame is all in your head and you have got nothing to be ashamed of. And nor do I. I carried all this shame about my online dating scam issue. And then once I started telling my story, it was so liberating. And people's responses are unreal, aren't they? You just don't expect people to be so empathic and supportive and understanding and non-judgmental. Like it's actually a real 360 from what you think in your mind. People are going to think of you.
Yes, absolutely. And also I think it's not fair to think that people are going to be judgmental, because I sort of had it that I can't share because people will be. And actually, when you give people a chance, they also get a chance to show up as supportive. So yeah, it's definitely empowering to share.
It is, isn't it? I totally agree. And I think that's why it's so wonderful that you're coming on this podcast to share your story today, because I'm really hopeful that it will help anybody else who is in your situation when you were younger and something traumatic has happened to them and they don't know where to turn. So tell me a bit about Rainlily. What do they do and what sort of work are you doing with them?
Rainlily is Hong Kong's only rape crisis centre, and it was just after I had started to talk about my situation and my story that I found out about them. I actually hadn't looked beforehand to see what was out there, but suddenly feeling empowered about it, I really wanted to make a difference. And so I happened to find them, and they're doing incredible work. They have a great website with advice for victims. They call them survivors, and also for supporters of people. I really love what it says on their website. I can tell you more about that in a bit, or you can have a look. But also in Hong Kong, they also a lot of legal advice and what to do, steps to take. They also provide counselling, and they will, assign a counsellor to take a person through all the stages that are necessary. And they've even gone as far as with one hospital to arrange a part of the hospital that's completely private, where the whole situation can be looked at from the police, the legal side, and the healthcare side at one time, because otherwise you end up having to go to the police station and the hospital, and it's already quite traumatic, right?
That's so progressive for Hong Kong, isn't it?
Yeah. Hopefully that will become all hospitals, but at the moment they've got so far. And just to have a team of counsellors that are just ready to help on a one-to-one basis, give support to victim survivors and their families and support.
Is that something that you're doing, mentoring or supporting survivors?
That's survivors.
Yeah. Do you use the term survivor, not victim?
I actually use both, because actually I think it's a bit of a phase. Personally, I definitely went through the victim phase.
Yes.
But yes, survivor.
Yeah.
In the end, yes, for sure. With Rainlily, I just support them. I try financially. I set up a society and we raise funds to provide ways of coping with trauma or stress, which is obviously rife in Hong Kong. The society I set up isn't exclusively for Rainlily, but they are one of the charities that we work with, along with others. But they're my favourite.
Brilliant.
In terms of my personal connection, and that, I hope to teach yoga or meditation specifically, and even perhaps mentor rape survivors.
Right. And what's the charity that you've set up to support people from trauma, just in case people are looking for it? Do you want to share the name?
Well, I set up a society just called Pause for a Cause. Okay. And that's a little generic, but it is about the pause. I have a health and wellness company called Pause, which is about trying to help people to find ways to pause. It's much needed. And then Pause for a Cause is the charitable arm that we raise funding, and so that we can help give these pauses and at the same time finance the facilitators. So I'm a facilitator, and then there's a whole team of us. We work with other charities that are set up, like Love 21 Foundation, Impact HK, the Justice Centre.
Oh, how fantastic.
Yeah,
That must be so
great.
rewarding to do something like that.
Oh, it is.
And give
so
back
rewarding
to the community and make a difference.
Oh, yeah, thanks. It is. It is so rewarding. I feel really lucky that it's possible to do that here.
Do you feel like something good has now come out of that traumatic, terrible experience that you went through? Do you feel like it has helped shape you into who you are today?
Yes, definitely. I mean, for a long time, I was pretty self-loathing and couldn't see that. But going through the journey to get to where I am now and have the life I have now and be the person I am now, I'm so proud of myself, and I have no problem with saying, oh, I love myself and think I'm awesome and I'm up to great things and the world is a beautiful place.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
But I would not have been sitting here sharing that if it wasn't for the whole journey that I've been through. And that is largely due to the support that I got to get to this
And did
point.
it take you like 20 years or so to get the right support from the incident?
Yes, definitely. That's partly, I think, because I didn't even tell my mum for, 5 or 6 years. That's already 5 or 6 years gone by. And, it really is when you share that you can acknowledge it and just see it for what it is. And it really does lose its charge on you.
How did your parents respond to the news?
My mum was driving the car.
Oh, you didn't tell her wife, did you?
Well, I think she knew. I was like, well, I'd had odd behavior for some time. Like I said, I was sort of a rebellious teenager anyway, but then 20 years old, still pretty much a teenager, right?
So young. It's hard. I was so young at 20, yeah.
Yeah, and I actually am going to ask her. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
For me, my story of it, my reflection is that it was just an extension of my previous behavior. And so I kind of felt like I was getting away with just being this moody, depressed,
young,
sort of
20
anxious,
something.
Yeah. Angsty, let's say, as well.
Bit emo.
More angsty, yeah, but actually not so stuck in a deep depression of can't do anything, but just always covering up, not being myself.
So once you told your mum, how did she respond from your point of view? She
was great.
She believed you? She was empathic?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. And were you glad that you told her? Did you wish you told her earlier?
Yes, I did. I should have trusted my mum. And I just didn't. So that's also, another area that is interesting to look at.
It is. And it's a great lesson for other people out there. Do trust your mum. And I didn't either. I didn't tell my parents till 10 years later when I was writing the book. And they were so supportive. In fact, when they read the book, they started crying because they felt so sorry that they hadn't been able to help me and that I didn't reach out to them and that I was alone dealing with it and all that sort of thing. So I think to learn from that, parents want to be there for their kids and they want to support them, and even if it stresses them out or upsets them, they'd rather know than not know, wouldn't you say?
I would definitely say, yeah. So I'm very lucky that I have a supportive family.
Yeah, and there's something about us trying to protect our parents, isn't there? We want to protect them, or we don't want to show our failures or our mistakes to them. We don't want to show our vulnerabilities. But as Brené Brown says, showing your vulnerabilities can be one of the bravest things that you ever do. And then it can really allow you to know yourself and love yourself.
Yeah.
I love that. Is totally paraphrasing what Brené Brown says.
Yeah, no, but I love that.
Along those lines.
I love that whole vulnerability thing. And that is another part of my journey, is when you share and you really do get the power of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And that it's powerful.
It is so powerful. And I just didn't know. I didn't know that until I actually started sharing. And I went through so much anxiety, worrying about my reputation and worrying about my job and what people would think. And the reaction was beyond my expectations of positivity. It's a real lesson for others. People who love you will support you and will not judge you. So reach out. And if you find the wrong person like you perhaps did in your experience, the first one, try someone else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't stop at one, which is probably where you kind of went wrong, but you were only 20.
Yeah, I was only 20. But the thing is, I just loved him so much. He was my ex-boyfriend. So it was just heavily emotionally charged.
So many
I wanted his support, but we were also just broken up. So
yeah. I wanted to just go back to the 20 years between the incident and to when you started to heal and recover and share your story. How did it impact you dating? How did it impact you going out into situations where you might put yourself at risk or even drinking with strangers or anything like that? Like, did it have any impact on your behaviours?
Okay, so over the 20 years, different phases. And definitely in the beginning, I was not interested in dating or anything. I was also had my big fat suit on, my fat protection puffy suit. So I wasn't feeling attractive. And that's also one of the saddest things, I think, is, a 21-year-old should feel attractive and be living life. And I was completely not. I was just...
Did you isolate yourself more at that time as well?
Well, no, I mean,
or
I hung out.
Not in relationships?
I didn't have a relationship for a few years after the rape, but I also left Hong Kong. I was in between, it happened. There's never a good time, but it wasn't a good time. Like I wasn't in the middle of doing anything when it happened. So I was like lost, and then I was like really lost. So I left Hong Kong, went to England, not for a specific purpose, but just to get away. I didn't really feel like, I just didn't really feel comfortable in my home for a while, actually, just being in Asia. I don't know if that's because the incident was with Asians. I certainly don't feel anything along those lines now about either Thailand, Thai, Bangkok. I've been back many times. I don't feel anything anymore around that.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, that is good. So I went to UK, but then, there's a whole layer of I'm in a new place and I don't know anyone. So I made friends and I really did have a great time after a while. I really had great relationships with friends, but certainly not dating, and for a few years.
And then what was the next sort of phase?
And the next phase was I fell in love with a dear man who is my daughter's father.
Oh, yeah. Lovely. It's lovely you can still talk about him like that.
Yeah.
I sadly can't do the same with the father of my daughter, but never mind.
Well, yeah, I'm also very lucky there. I met this great guy and I'm sure he was part of my healing process.
Did you tell him?
Oh, that's a good question. No, I don't know if I did or not.
But having that love and that relationship.
Yeah, having the relationship.
Made you feel better about yourself or helped you to heal.
Yeah, just to experience love and being loved was healing, I'm sure. That is a really good question. I don't actually remember us ever discussing that. Certainly wasn't really an issue. In those days, I think I had, in the early days, I really did just sort of having some reactions like drinking too much, but I wasn't crying or talking about it. Yeah, so it was still pretty bottled up at that point. That relationship, unfortunately, didn't last forever. And then I went through a stage of just really enjoying going out and meeting guys and hooking up after a while. And then I had a few relationships with guys that it was just never going to work. And that's when I really noticed, after a few of those, I really noticed that there was a pattern that I just didn't trust. There was just no trust. So actually, it didn't matter how nice I found a guy or the relationship was or the connection, it was just never going to work.
Because you couldn't trust, because you hadn't done that healing work that you needed to do.
Yeah, clear. And I'm sure it's related to that.
That makes sense. So you never reported it to the police in Thailand or Hong Kong?
No.
Do you ever regret that, or do you wish that you did?
Okay, so this is another interesting thing I think about rape is, what about the rapists? Should they have got away with it? I mentioned earlier, I sometimes have these questions of, are they serial rapists? Was it a one-off? Do they have children now? Do their parents know? All these things. But I know everyone always says, forgiveness is healing. I don't know how easy it is to forgive, but now that I've started this empowering sharing, I really don't feel anything. I mean, I have been through exercises that have come up as part of healing where you say what you really wanted to say.
Very cathartic, can't it?
And so, to get to perhaps a space of forgiveness, I've definitely been through the anger phase and been able to express it in a safe environment, guided. And I don't know.
I guess you really didn't have the opportunity because you had to get a flight.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the key things. And then you can't really report it in Hong Kong because it didn't happen here.
Yeah, that's clear to me, is that I don't really have a regret that I didn't follow up. I think I just wanted to get out of there. The only thing is that I wonder if there is a part of, because it's such a procedure, I mentioned on Rainlily, there's all the procedure. Maybe there is something healing about that procedure that I missed out on.
Yes, I'm sure there probably is.
Because there's no closure and there's no there's no, it's in writing anywhere.
Yeah. And there's nobody being held accountable. There's nobody believing you. So that does make sense. So would you recommend to victims of rape or sexual assault that they do report it to the police and that they do move forward with it? I guess it must be a personal decision.
I think it must be a personal decision, but I think if you are able to get the support from Rainlily or family members or friends, I do think you should. Yeah, I do.
Did you look for any resources to support you in the early days, or did you just soldier on with your moody early 20s drinking phase?
I clear, I can handle this. I'm not going to let it bother me.
Right. So you were being stoic, were you?
Yes.
Like, I'm not going to let this upset me, but really it did deep down.
Yeah, deep down. I mean, I was very clear with my friends who I did share it with. I was just like, I'm not going to let this ruin my life. I'm not going to let this stop me from having a life that I would have had. But now when I look back and, while we're talking, I'm clear that it affected my life. Yeah.
Yeah, it changed the course of your life because you wouldn't necessarily be where you are now and doing what you're doing to help other rape survivors. So it's quite amazing, isn't it, how these things can impact us?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Have you faced any criticism or judgment since you have told your story and become a little bit more public with it?
No, not at all.
Isn't that amazing?
Isn't that amazing?
That is brilliant.
Not at all. I mean, yeah, actually the opposite, similar to what you said. If nothing else, I've had, whenever I share, people come and tell me their story. And I still can't believe how every time I share my story, so many people share theirs. And it's just shocking how many stories there are, which is like the whole Me Too movement, right?
Yes. Is it something like 3 out of 4 women or something are affected by the Me Too situation in some way or another? It's crazy, isn't it? When was the first time you shared it publicly? You've spoken at forums and events, haven't you?
Only a few times, but yes, only since I think I did the Landmark sharing where I shared in the Landmark. It was the first time I probably shared with strangers in a group setting. And it was a small, safe group, but it was only a matter of months, maybe that was 6 months before I then took part in the Hong Kong Women's Festival in 2018. I think it was November, maybe October, but yeah. And they had a screening of a domestic violence film. And then I was part of a panel at the end of and it was really great. It was really great to be with the other women. One was also a survivor of domestic violence and the other was a Rainlily counsellor. And so the 3 of us were on a panel together.
Brilliant. So did you field questions from the audience?
Yes.
Wow, how cool.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yes.
Wow, how amazing. And how did it feel, first of all, to share it with the group in Landmark where you knew you were really safe? And then to move out to this panel, which is a bit more public and you don't really know who you're speaking to.
Okay, so different setting, different environment. And also, in the Landmark, I was sharing whatever I wanted to share, whereas you're right, I was fielding unknown questions, right? I just felt so empowered. After the Landmark, I felt so empowered. I was really up for that question and answer. And also to be vulnerable. If someone asks me something that I feel uncomfortable or I respond by crying or which actually didn't happen but could have, I was just ready for that. I'm totally clear. It is what it is. And it happened. And I'm okay that it happened. And I'm in a position that I can share, ultimately, hopefully, to work with charity like Rainlily to prevent it happening.
And what sort of things can we do to prevent these kind of things happening?
Yeah, I think it's
a huge question.
It's a huge question. But I mean, of course, to keep talking about it so that it's not a taboo topic.
People teaching young men how to respect women. Obviously, assault can happen to anybody, but the Me Too movement is primarily women. Of course, there are men who have been assaulted and raped as well. But I guess it is about respect and kindness and things like that. And I think perhaps even, correct me if I'm wrong, but do you think also we need more support for mental health issues and more awareness of mental health and more access for people with mental health issues?
Definitely. I think if we get to the root cause, it is really looking at people's mental health issues, their circumstances and their lifestyle could be part of how people develop.
As a mother of a young girl, how did this experience influence your parenting? Were you more strict or worried? Did you talk to your daughter about these kind of things? Did you try to encourage her not to put herself at risk so something like this happened to her? Were you worried that something like this might happen to her?
Yes, good question. I definitely think it impacted because, she will definitely agree that I was, quite a strict, was always paranoid that this would happen to her. When she was little, I sent her to Taekwondo lessons. Not a bad thing. But I did it because of that. I really did.
Wow, isn't that interesting? Sort of it had a little influence on your parenting through all her life.
Yes, but definitely when she was a teenager, I was just overly cautious, I think, in my concern of what would happen to her. which isn't really healthy. And she didn't know.
Right.
No.
So she didn't know.
No.
So she didn't know why you were being overly protective.
Yeah. But then once I, started sharing, she was one of the first people I shared with.
How old was she around that time? In her early 20s, was she?
Yes, she must have been about 20 when I shared with her.
What was her response?
Well, she's such a diamond. She just was like, okay, thank you for sharing with me. And I told her that what had happened and that I really wanted to share my story so that I could also help other people. And so I told her that all in one time. And so she was really supportive. She was just like, wow.
Isn't that great? And did she make any connection with what you were like when she was a teenager through you sharing that story? Did she sort of go, oh, that's why you were so strict or worried about me?
I have never asked her if she joined the dots, but certainly our relationship is much closer. Yeah, okay. For sure. I mean, like she can relate to me as who I really am, which is the whole thing, is if you don't tell anyone, then you're always like sort of undercover. Well, the way I see it is that there are different stages that you go through, a bit like the grief cycle.
Can you explain how you see it?
Well, I think everyone has their own unique
journey
experience. Yeah, of course. But, I think there is the denial and then anger and then finally acceptance, if you're lucky enough to get to acceptance.
How do you advise people to get to that point of acceptance, knowing that you have made it there? What advice would you give to somebody?
I think everyone will need to take their own time, but I definitely think just what we're doing, what we're talking about the whole time really is finding someone that you trust. And if you're that person that someone comes to you, then for you to also find out how to be supportive. If you feel like in a panic yourself, to make sure that you just learn that it's good to listen and to be supportive.
Yeah, let's unpack that a bit. What can you do as someone who is being told about somebody's traumatic experience?
Yeah, I think it's
listening,
isn't listening. There's nothing you can really say.
It's listening and then encouraging them to get some sort of professional help. So whether you take them to the GP, whether you get a counsellor, whether they go to a healer, whether they speak to somebody who has experience in this area, going to something like Rainlily. And in every country, there'll be some sort of crisis line or rape support unit. There are definitely resources out there, and we're so lucky we've got Google these days. So you can look together. You can look together, can't you, to find out what is the best fit for the person that's revealing, so that it's not just left sitting with the two of you.
Yes, I think that's true. But, it is also so private. I think the supporter just needs to really listen and, offer a space for the person to keep talking.
Yeah, that's great advice. What do you think the community can do to help violence against women?
Wow, I think we just need to keep talking about it. Definitely stop pretending it doesn't happen.
That's a big one. Many people, it happens behind closed doors or in domestic violence, and they just hide it away and they feel like they can change that person, or that they're even your self-esteem can be so beaten down that you feel like you're not worthy of help or support. So all of those reasons can mean that people don't reach out for help.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure shame is crippling for people. But if it could become totally accepted that we talk about, air our dirty laundry, so to speak, then, I think that would be really progressive. If it was just normal to share all these things that go on, it would just be so normal to share and normal to accept. And I think that would create a much better foundation.
Yeah, I think that's lovely. Thank you so much, Jill, for sharing your story with me today. It's been really amazing, and I hope that we reach out to some people out there, and if they need any help or support. Are you open for anybody getting in touch with you?
Absolutely.
How can they do that?
Yes, I'd love people to reach out to me. I'm always here. And you can find me on Instagram or Facebook through pause.hk.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jill. That's brilliant.
Yeah, I want to thank you, and also for sharing your story too.
Oh, yeah. Look, it's been the best thing I ever did. I had no idea that it was going to be so empowering and that I would be able to help so many people and have such a great impact. And I'm really, really proud of what I've done. So thank you for sharing your story. Maybe we'll have maybe we'll have to turn it into a podcast, like Fool Me Twice.
Yeah.
For my listeners out there, thank you for listening. If you know anyone who would benefit from hearing Jill tell her story about her sexual assault, then please share this podcast with them. Please go to rate and review us on iTunes look for Hong Kong Confidential. We'd really appreciate your 5-star review. And for my patrons out there, they're going to get 4 secret questions that Jill is going to answer after this podcast. And if you would like to hear the answers to Jill's 4 secret questions, you can go to patreon.com/Hong Kong Confidential. And for as little as $1 a month, you can sponsor Hong Kong Confidential and you'll be able to hear all the secret questions from all of my guests. So we're going to do that now. Thank you so much for coming on today, Jill. It's been absolutely amazing.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Brilliant. Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.